Hello everybody, my name is NCSO7, and a while ago I made a video on Fire Emblem Engage. In that video, I praised the game saying it was my favorite in the entire series. Now, while I still think that Engage is a really good game, and honestly kind of underrated in my opinion, I don't believe in saying it's my favorite. After really thinking about it for a while, to me, my actual favorite Fire Emblem game is not only the one that got me into the series, but also hooked me with loads of personality, lore, story, and so much more. So yes, we're going to be talking about Fire Emblem Fates. Nah, I'm just kidding, it's actually Three Houses. Now, I don't want to throw the favorite thing around too much because then it won't mean much, but Fire Emblem Three Houses is not only the Fire Emblem game I've put the most time into, but is also one of my favorite games of all time, period. So, today, I wanted to give my thoughts on this game because boy do I have a lot. And since I've talked about Engage and Echoes, which are my other favorite ones, I think it's time to talk about the best one in my opinion. Also, massive spoilers for all routes and characters in the game, so yeah, be ready for that. With that all being said, let's begin. So touching on the development on this game to start off, Three Houses would start as another 3DS FE game until it would eventually be moved to the Switch, to which the team wanted to make this game as big as they could. But since Intelligent Systems couldn't really do it by themselves, they got some help with Koei Tecmo to work on the game together, since they had done work on Fire Emblem Warriors together as well. Many things would be changed, such as removing the triangle system the series was known for, and bringing back a time skip as well as a completely new school setting. While the game was teased to be in development in January 2017, Three Houses wouldn't get properly revealed until E3 2018, with an early 2019 release date on the horizon. Until the game was then pushed back to July 26th of 2019 when the game would finally release. Later in 2020, DLC would be added that include a side story known as Cindered Shadows, as well as other nice additions to the main game. And as for the unused content, well, there's a lot of stuff. Like characters like Rhea, Sothis, and Geralt being playable units, an even harder difficulty than Maddening, many different portraits for characters that just are never used, and a potentially scrapped DLC character. There's a lot. I strongly recommend checking the cutting room floor if you want to learn more about that stuff, but that's kind of it regarding the development and unused content. Let's really get into the game itself and how it looks. Now, I know it's very low-hanging fruit, but Three Houses really doesn't look good. Like, okay, yes, the character design is absolutely stellar, some of the best in the series, especially the character portraits as well. They look really nice, but man, the environments look extremely dull, and the game doesn't even run the best either. Especially when you get into actual battles and you see just how barren and dull almost every area looks, especially going into the view where you're really close to the units and move them around. This game really needed to look prettier. I understand that Three Houses is a more dark Fire Emblem game, but seriously, why couldn't the game look more stylized? Instead it looks like a late 2000s game trying to be realistic, which doesn't work. Fodlan does have a lot of interesting lore, but man, they couldn't make the world look a little bit more interesting too? It's a real disappointment, honestly. In fact, I would even say that older FE games looked better than this, which is the real shame. Even the anime cutscenes in the game aren't that much better, as they're either just in the same style as the rest of the game, or the anime cutscenes are just kind of there. They look okay, but they're just kind of there. I don't know, this game could have looked a lot better, I will say, visually. Now, to be fair, if you are playing Fire Emblem, you're playing for the gameplay. And the gameplay here is pretty solid. It's like other FE games, where you move units across a map, killing enemies and making sure your units don't die. Whether you're trying to kill a boss or complete some other objective to finish the map, units can be in many different classes with different playstyles and weapon types. That's the main battle gameplay. However, this game does bring in a school system which kind of splits the gameplay between that of a tactical RPG gameplay that are seen in the battles and the social sim gameplay of the school. To start with the school or monastery gameplay, Each month you'll have a free day each week where you can run around the monastery using your points to do various tasks, like eating a shitload of meals, fishing, singing, winning tournaments if your units are up to snuff, and doing stuff to build supports with fellow units who are, well, actually your students. Yeah, in the school phase, you're the teacher of a class, whichever you choose, more on that later, and thus your students are your units, so you spend time building them up, whether through teaching them specific skills for certain classes, or building supports with them and the other students. There's also seminars you can do as well, but I don't think anyone really does those, so yeah, no one cares. Now, I am aware that this gameplay does get stale over time and feels more like a chore than anything else, and while I do think these tasks are quite some fun pre-time skip, post-time skip I feel is when people really start getting bored of it, and it's honestly understandable. To give credit though, the monastery is very big with lots of areas to explore, and every chapter of the game has new dialogue from everyone inside its walls, which can be really cool to hear all of it, since all the dialogue in this game is fully voiced, which can make some interactions much more memorable. One chapter in particular is the one after Gerald, your dad, dies, where all the dialogue with NPCs reflects what happened, and really even the music changes, which gives the monastery much more life than other hubs. But yeah, I can definitely see why people get bored of this gameplay after a while. But hey, there's still the battle gameplay, which is pretty similar to previous games, though there are some new changes. Like I said in the history section, the triangle system of previous games was removed, and in its place were some new additions, such as the battalions, which can help your units get stronger or do other things, as well as any unit being capable of being in any class within their gender. So if you wanted every unit to be, say, a bow user, well, you can absolutely do that, which is really cool because it gives people more opportunities to make units that would be garbage at least a little better. At the very least, it can make for really cool challenge runs. As for the battles themselves, they are fun as usual, though one thing I do need to bring up is the multiple routes. With there being 3 houses to choose from, you choose one of these houses and then are stuck on that house's respective route, like Azure Moon for the Blue Lions or Verdant Wind for the Golden Deer. Now, this sounds great, but the downside is that the pre-time skip battles all play the same across all the routes, and even when you get post-time skip, many maps and objectives are the same across all routes, which makes the whole unique route thing feel much less interesting gameplay wise. Especially if you're one to play through all the routes, the game's battles can get honestly really repetitive. But even then, the battle gameplay is still fun, especially when units get a crit. It always pumps me up. Overall, the gameplay of 3 Houses is really solid, although it does have a good amount of repetition. The school system can also feel a bit much for some players, and while I do like that they kind of went with a more Persona style gameplay that they have going, it isn't exactly something I'm jumping at returning to when playing the game. Also, to just quickly mention the length of the game, each route takes about like 25 to 30 hours to beat, so yeah, for $60, you definitely get your money's worth gameplay-wise. However, gameplay alone is not why I love this game so much. Next, let's talk about the story. The story of 3 Houses is probably one of the biggest things that people still talk about to this day. I would say that out of all the FE games I've played, 3 Houses is easily the most complicated story-wise. Now, while that does seem like a positive, there are some negatives about it that I'll get to later. But to touch on the story briefly, you play as Byleth, who starts as a mercenary before getting hired to be the new teacher at Garreg Mach Monastery. Then you choose either the Black Eagle's house, the Blue Lion's house, or the Golden Deer house to teach, and thus the story splits between the 3 houses. However, at least for the pre-time skip, they all play the same, with you fighting various different enemies, doing various tasks for the church, and hell, even at one point doing a big mock battle between all 3 houses. Eventually, Byleth's dad gets killed by Kranya, who's part of the Agarthans, which are basically the main enemies of the game, or at least the most blatantly evil. Eventually, after dishing out some revenge, Edelgard then declares war on the church, and thus Byleth falls off a cliff and sleeps for 5 years, while Fodlan gets thrust into lots of war and stuff. Now, as for the pre-time skip, or White Clouds as it's called, it's pretty solid when it comes to getting you into the world and its characters, and it lasts long enough for the sudden war to really hit you, at least for me. Now, going into the time skip, I'm going to talk about each route individually to make it easier for me. Starting with arguably the best route in the game, Azure Moon for the Blue Lions, it's really solid. I'll get more into Dimitri's character later in the video, but the way he goes from a nice guy to a complete monster is so cool, and seeing how it costs him and eventually snaps out of it is really cool to see, as all of it is through him and eventually it's really cool. Dimitri wants so badly to behead Edelgard earlier in the Azure Moon route, but once he snaps out of his murder mode, he really wants to end the war peacefully with Edelgard. Unfortunately, Edelgard doesn't really stop and ends up becoming this anomaly, only to then die in the ending. Overall, Azure Moon is one of the best routes in the game because it really tells a good story about revenge and getting over it. Now moving on to Verdant Wind, the Golden Deer's route. This one's okay. The story here isn't super strong, as Claude doesn't really go through much development over the course of the story, as it's basically just fight the Empire and whatnot. Though I do really like how all the other Golden Deer are used in the story, having more of a role in their route than other houses in their respective routes. This route plays very similarly to that of Silver Snow, which makes Verdant Wind not as interesting, though the final standoff against Nemesis is really cool and a really solid final boss for the route, even if it doesn't have much to do with the Golden Deer themselves. Now moving on to the Black Eagle's house, which was the first house I chose. This house actually has two different routes, one where you side with Edelgard and one where you oppose her. To start with the one where you side here, can I first say to get on this route, that being Crimson Flower, you have to do some really dumb things to give you the option. I never liked that. I wish it just gave you the option immediately. I don't like that. Anyways, Crimson Flower is probably the most infamous route in the whole game, since it's much shorter than the others, and also Edelgard. I'll also get to Edelgard's character more later, though I feel the hate for this route is really overblown. This route gives you very different maps and objectives, which I really like since it's the only route where you side with the Empire, so it makes sense that you would play out differently. And going against the Alliance and Kingdom and Church really makes you feel like the bad guy, especially if you play those other routes first. I do agree in saying that the route did feel a bit unfinished, as you are told several times that you will fight the Agarthans, but this only happens through the paired endings, which is kind of lame, though Rhea as the final boss is really cool, especially with Ferdiad being on fire. It's really cool. Now as for the route where you oppose Edelgard, Silver Snow, this route really isn't the best. Not only do you lose Edelgard and Hubert, who were some of my strongest units on my first playthrough, but the story is the same as Verdant Wind. Rhea doesn't even show up until way too late. Even though this is the route about the church, she isn't playable, and the game forces the Black Eagles and members of the church to work together. And I don't know if this is just me, but I don't feel like these groups were meant to work together. I always felt like they were meant to oppose each other. They barely have any chemistry amongst each other outside of supports. The final boss is also bullshit, as it's just Rhea again, but this time it doesn't make any sense. You save Rhea, but because of some stupid disease, she becomes evil and then you have to kill her. Unless you get an A support with her, which keeps her alive so that way you can marry her, which is just stupid. Silver Snow was my first route that I never beat, though I made it all the way to the last stage but couldn't beat it. And honestly, to me, is the worst route in the whole game. And I know Silver Snow was the first route written for the game, but honestly, it's definitely the worst. Okay, finally got through all the main story stuff. I know that took forever, but now I'm going to get into some more small and nitpicky stuff, more general stuff. One thing that I really love about the game is just how much lore and detail there is in everything in the game. Everything was extremely thought out, and practically any corner in the game has some sort of mystery, especially characters. More on them later. However, while I like that there's a lot of depth, I also feel there's almost too much, to the point where certain plot threads are just needlessly convoluted. One big example is the tragedy of Dusker, which is most prominent amongst the Blue Lions. I feel the event could have been as simple as an attack from the Agarthans to kill the king and the prince, but instead it's made to be this way more complicated than it really needs to be. Scenes like this one with Gilbert and Rodrigue do make it somewhat interesting, though you never really find out what really happened, which is disappointing. I do feel that at least part of it is due to the fact that the game was rushed, despite being delayed several times, which led to some of these story inconsistencies, but regardless, it does make some cool discussion regardless, though I really wish some of this stuff was fleshed out a little bit better. If they're going to go into that much detail on stuff that people don't really read up on, they may as well go in detail on this stuff. Overall though, the story of the game is decent. It has some really good moments, but also some really dumb or confusing moments as well. But to me, while the story is decent, what really brings the whole experience of this game together are its characters. Three Houses to me probably has the best cast of characters in a video game that I've played so far. There are so many characters to talk about, with all of them having at least some sort of depth, and while I won't go fully in depth on every character here, I'm going to at least talk about pretty much all the main ones. For starters, let's start with the character that you play as, Byleth. They're okay. I get there's supposed to be another silent protagonist, and while I understand that it's because of the creststone inside of them which stunts them from having emotions, it's still a loophole so they can just do another silent JRPG protagonist like all these other JRPGs are doing, but at least later games like Three Hopes and Engage were able to give Byleth some more personality. Now, let's move on to the actual houses themselves, and starting off with probably not only the most controversial character in Three Houses, but the entirety of Fire Emblem as a whole, Edelgard. Like I mentioned before, she wages war on the church, and this is because she wants to dismantle the crest system where those with crests get higher power while non-bears are treated like shit, and instead replace it with a system based on one's own merit. Now, Edelgard does do some things like using assistance from the Agarthans, which many may say makes her a bit more on the bad side, especially since other parts of the game don't really paint her in the best light. Though, I think what's important is that she's not morally right or wrong, which is a very common theme in the game. All the house leaders in some way or another are in a very morally gray zone. While I'm not going to say Edelgard was right about everything, I do think there is some truths on her end, and I think she is one of the most interesting characters this game created. And as for the other Black Eagles, Hubert is alright. I like his dark nature, but he's kind of just there. Bernadetta is quite lovable, although she can be annoying in some supports. Lindhart is based as fuck. Caspar is quite fun to watch with his impulsive personality. Dorothea is pretty solid, although post-time skip, she's way too depressed to be honest. Petra's pretty cool, just in general, and Ferdinand von Eyre is Ferdinand von Eyre. Now moving on to the Blue Lions, starting with the man, Dimitri. He is probably one of the best characters in the game. In fact, he may possibly be my favorite character in the game. I'm not 100% sure. Seeing him at first as the typical good boy Fire Emblem Lord and then devolving into a complete beast post time skip, it's so cool. Seeing how his actions cost him and ultimately becoming the savior king his kingdom needed, it was really fun to see happen. And his supports are among some of the best in the game, especially the ones with Felix, which, well, speaking of which, might be my favorite male character that isn't a house leader. Seriously, Felix is so sassy, and I just love his interactions with some characters, because you can clearly tell he does care about his friends, even if he's really mean about it. And as for the other Blue Lions, Dedue is quite likable, as he never really says anything bad about anyone at all. Annette is adorable, being the first girl I S-supported. Mercedes is pretty solid, especially given her rather dark upbringing. Ingrid is really fun to see interact with others, such as Sylvain or Raphael. And Sylvain is also quite interesting. I know some people don't like him, but I really like the idea that he's a flirty boy, only really because of how he thinks others view him, which doesn't exactly make him right, but I think it's kind of interesting. And Ash is alright. Sorry, I don't have anything else to say on him. Oh yeah, and Gilbert exists. Does anyone like this guy? I don't think anyone does. Moving on to the Golden Deer, starting off with Claude, he's also pretty high up there within the ranks of good characters in the game, and while he isn't nearly as interesting or complex as Edelgard or Dimitri, his laid-back personality is really fun to see, especially in his supports. And as for the other Golden Deer, Hilda's pretty solid, both unit-wise and also her design, though her personality can be a bit uninteresting at times with the whole lazy thing. Lawrence is a character I initially thought was not that good, but became one of the best in his house, honestly. He's so funny. Raphael and Ignatz, well, they're okay. Same with Leonie, but Marianne is really solid, especially with how she actually develops over the time skip, actually becoming less depressed later. And Lysithea probably is the best girl in the entire house. She might maybe be my favorite girl character. I'm not entirely sure, but she's really, really good. When her backstory was revealed, it really made me love her more than I did before. And that's pretty much it for the main houses. And as for which of them is my favorite, it's possibly the Black Eagles, since none of the members of the house really make me feel like they're just complete and utter fodder. Okay, it might be because they were the first house I chose, but honestly, all these houses have really good characters. However, there is still more, like the church members, starting with Rhea. And while I do feel that the hate for Rhea is quite overblown, she does feel a bit two-faced, especially going from White Clouds to Crimson Flower, where she really goes from like a good person to really like evil. And she also barely plays the role after the time skip. Hell, she isn't even playable, which really sucks because I feel that making her playable, especially on the Silver Snow route, would make more people like her. You'd see more of her perspective. As for the other members, Sedith and Flayn are pretty solid. Not groundbreaking, but solid. Shamir's also pretty cool, though Catherine is kind of just there, although she's really good in battle though. And of course, who could forget Cyril? No one does. No one likes Cyril. And also, just to quickly touch on the Ashen Wolves house from the DLC, Yuri, Balthus, Constance, and Happy are alright. I'm sorry to you, I never really got the entirety of their stories down. I just think that they're okay, so yeah. While that isn't all the characters in the game, I do feel that most of the characters in this game are really solid, and yes, I was talking about the characters as characters, not units, because honestly, the characters and the personalities they bring to the table are honestly the reason why the game is so good to me, and why it's so replayable. The amount of supports there are is insane, and I'm just gonna rattle off my personal favorites, at least some of them. Felix and Annette, Ingrid and Sylvain, Bernadetta and Ferdinand, Dorothea and Ferdinand, Bernadetta and Felix, Linhardt and Lysithea, Dimitri and Marianne, Flayn and Ignatz, and so on. There are a bunch of others I didn't mention, so I really recommend going through the supports in this game because most of them are really good. Overall, I would say the characters are what makes the game so fucking good. The music in this game is also really, really good. While it's not the best soundtrack out there, it is probably my favorite soundtrack out of the entire Fire Emblem series. So many bangers came in this game. Like, do I even need to mention Fodlan Winds, Chasing Daybreak, Apex of the World, God's Shattering Star, and Between Heaven and Earth? I mean, everybody knows those songs are really, really good. But even with the music outside of the battles, there's a lot of very good music, especially a lot of the music for the supports, the monastery, both pre and post time skip, and the song that plays during the paired endings called Star in the Morning Sky. Honestly, if you haven't played the game, at least listen to the soundtrack, as it's really good. That is if you can find it anywhere, because the playlist I used to use on YouTube to listen to it got taken down, so yeah, it might be a bit more difficult to find the soundtrack, but overall the music in this game is absolutely solid. Before we conclude, I'm going to just quickly touch on the DLC for this game and what it contains. So what you get with this DLC is some stuff for the main game, and then the main side story, the Cindered Shadows. And as for this side story, I personally didn't play anything after the second battle, and I frankly don't care enough to do it for this video. I'm sorry. While I think the Ashen Wolves are all pretty cool, I honestly don't care enough to play through the whole story, since it's much more separated from the main story, taking place with Byleth and the house leaders and the Ashen Wolves going through the abyss underneath Garreg and stuff happens. While it does reveal some more lore about the history of Fodlan, there isn't anywhere near as much as many people had hoped for, and it doesn't really give us that much more than the base game gives us. Also, the additions outside the side story, like the sauna and the alternate costumes for characters, those are okay. Nothing amazing, but just cool little things to hold you over through the various waves of DLC. Now, would I recommend the DLC? Personally, for $25 or so, I would only say get it if you really want more of Three Houses, though, considering how much Three Houses has, I don't really know. I haven't played the whole DLC, so I can't really comment on that, but I don't know. Hopefully I haven't pissed off too many people with that take, but honestly, I don't care. This is the DLC section over. Let's just cut to this transition to end to the conclusion. Man, I really love this game. You feel me? Now, is Fire Emblem Three Houses a perfect game? Hell no! It is very far from a perfect game, with it feeling like the game was quite rushed, like certain plot points being over convoluted, and the game not looking the best. The story and characters that are present are honestly some of the most unique out of the series, and in my opinion, probably some of the best. Is it the best FE game? Objectively speaking, I don't know, since I don't think there is an objective best game in the series, but to me, Fire Emblem Three Houses is easily not only my favorite Fire Emblem game, but also one of my favorite games of all time. And to think that I bought the game on a complete whim almost 2 years after the game came out in a Walmart of all places, but hey, that's where some of the best experiences can come from. Not Walmart, but you know, getting stuff like that on a complete whim. Anyways, I'm dragging this on. This game is really, really good. Please play it if you haven't before. Even if you're not into tactical RPGs, I'm not even that good at them either. But hey, I really liked it. You probably will too. So, heavily recommend this game. But anyways, that is it for this video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I don't know if I'm going to do any other Fire Emblem videos. I'm not really sure. I'm not entirely sure of what's going to be going on in the future with the channel and stuff like that, but I should have some good content coming out for the rest of the year at the very least. And yeah, let me know what you guys think of this game in the comments below. And yeah, thank you all for supporting the channel. Consider sharing this with other people. Yeah, so let me know if you guys would want to see a Three Hopes video, which would certainly be a mouthful. I definitely have some stuff I could say about that. Let me know if you guys would want to see that, but anyways, I'm done. I'm rambling at this point. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Peace out and take care, everybody.